I'm not exactly sure where it came from, but it's undeniably true of me that I love buying and trying things that are labeled new. It's uncanny, but my eye or my consciousness seems transically drawn to products that say new. Mom will smile a knowing smile when we're browsing the store or emptying a shopping cart, and she spots the word new. Sometimes she'll have a bit of fun when I go to pull an old standby off the shelf and put it in the cart. She'll deliberately find something that says new on it and say, "Hey, how about this one?" My attention was drawn to this word in the creative process of considering the spring season and a fundamental truth that is illustrated in its essence. It wasn't where I started, but it was where I landed. As I began to rework my outline, I guess my mind was still lingering a bit in winter and Lent. It's tough for me to transition from it each year since it has become so integral to my true self and how my life speaks. It was in the lingerings with Lent that I found the perfect illustration of new. At the dawn of the events of Jesus' last few days, we find the sacred scene of what we refer to as the Last Supper. For the great majority of my life of faith, that meal went relatively unnoticed. Yes, I had read the story, and yes, I knew it was the inspiration for communion, but it was not until a few years into observing Lent that I began to grasp the deep meaning and significance of the meal that made everything new. This was not simply the last time Jesus shared a meal with his disciples, although it was. And it was not simply Jesus sharing his heart and modeling the servant he desired his disciples to become, although it was. This was the perfect Passover lamb, taking the central elements of the central feast of the central festival that meant everything to his disciples and made them all new in himself. He didn't throw out the elements, the feast or the festival, and replace them with something new. He took everything the disciples and the Jewish people knew and transformed them, giving them new meaning in him. It was no longer the bread that couldn't have leavening because the people of Israel had too little time before their exodus from Egypt. It was now Jesus' own body that would soon be sacrificed for all people. It was not just one of the 4 cups of wine served at the meal to signify the 4 promises God gave Moses in Exodus 6:6-7, to share with the people in delivering them from slavery. It was the 3rd cup, the cup of redemption, that was now filled with the blood he was about to shed for the sins of all people for all time, that Jesus shared with his disciples that night. The purpose and intention and redemption in that sacred Seder is so consistent with the way I have experienced God working in the everyday of my own life. He fearfully and wonderfully made me, and then chose not to replace me because of the mess I had made of things with my sin, but redeem me. He takes every broken piece that I believed defined me and doomed me, and makes me new in himself. It's much more than a Last Supper. It is the old story of redemption and deliverance made new in Jesus that calls and invites everyone to the table. I have celebrated 2 communions in my life that forever changed how I experience and observe it. The first was in the company of 4th, 5th, and 6th graders that included Spencer, led by a Project 15 brother, Mr. Williman. He redefined communion for me by teaching and acting the full gospel narrative that included Jesus washing the disciples' feet before the meal. He invited all the kids to participate, but didn't insist that they did. It was fascinating to watch them come to a decision about whether they were going to join in. I washed Mr. Williman's feet that day, and I washed Spencer's. I had my own feet washed, and I left that day believing that foot washing should be a part of every observance of communion. I was humbled in the act of washing, and even more so in being washed. It quieted and grounded me in a way that I experienced the elements more deeply. And who knew that taking your socks off, holding your bare feet over a basin of water, and allowing someone else to wash them would expose and reveal so much? The second observance was during a home church week, when the group that was gathered washed feet and took the elements seated around some folding tables in our living room. Although for many the foot washing appeared a bit awkward, I felt in the midst of a scene in the early church where people gathered in homes and likely observed in a similar way. It was also the first time I had sat facing someone while observing communion. Up to that point, I had always sat in a pew facing the pulpit and saw only the backs of people's heads, and very rarely did my eyes stray to the periphery of my own pew. I had come to believe that communion was a highly individual thing, that a pastor said some words, deacons or trustees passed the plates, you bowed your head and closed your eyes until the organ stopped playing, and you went right back to closing your eyes after you ate or drank. You prayed silently, and you certainly didn't peek. That morning we sat together around folding tables and looked each other in the eye as we passed and took the elements. It was the first time I saw an adult not take the elements, likely responding with his heart to the words that were shared about not partaking if your heart was not right with God at that moment. It was an act of true courage out in the open for everyone seated there to see, and it changed me. In the idea stage for these seasons videos, spring was titled The Season of Life. It made so much sense and would allow me to show the contrast between the dying of fall and the rest in winter to creation bursting forth in the spring. This was resonant with the deep significance of my practice of Lent, where the darkness of winter and in our lives was broken by the brilliant burst of resurrection and new life in the created world. But as I sat down in late winter to begin to develop the outline and consider the spring season more deeply, the word new began to echo in my mind and in my heart. I've already shared its significance with you and stated my case for its illustration in the observance of communion, but there is one more bit of connective tissue to seasonal themes we've already explored that I would like to share. In my original research of the season of life, I ran across an interesting fact that happened to be the only detail I documented before changing course to the season of new. That fact was specific to spring bulbs and their life cycle. I noted, and I quote, "The leaves of bulbs must be allowed to yellow and die naturally. In the dying process, the leaves are producing food to sustain the bulb through another year and produce a new bud." It sends a sensation up and down my spine every time I discover another way that God's creation echoes back the name and nature of the Creator. I feel that same sensation when God connects people and events and ideas like Project 15 and these seasons videos in a way that appears calculated and pre-planned, but are in every way divinely inspired and authored. It's no accident that He birthed the idea of Project 15 in my heart. It's no accident that He tweaked my creative consciousness with this season series. It's no accident that I came across that fact about the leaves of spring bulbs just before redirecting my focus towards a new area of emphasis. The connective tissue of the created world and all those involved in this sacred project is strong and eternal. Spencer, once again in the brevity of this video and the fraction of time that was spent on the expansive subject of communion and Jesus making things new, there is an invitation into a conversation. A conversation that at times will be intimate and secret between you and God, and at times will be collective and public with the greater circle of lives God intersects yours with. Remember that the significance of this conversation is eternal and is essential to who you are becoming as a man. I love you more than you could possibly know. I'm proud of you, more than you could possibly know. Hold tight to the one who makes all things new. Hold tight to the hope that it means for your life, no matter what mountain or deep dark hole you find yourself in. We were all fearfully and wonderfully made in His image, and at the same time are made up of a collection of broken pieces. How amazing is it to have a Savior and a God that doesn't see the only option of making us whole as discarding or replacing all those broken pieces. Instead, he gathers them all, takes them, and makes you and I new.